There's a lot of talk that Donald Trump may be impeached or may be forced to resign, or perhaps if he gets subpoenaed, it will cause other problems in his administration. And so that has naturally led to drawing analogies and comparisons to today's presidency of Donald Trump to the presidency of Richard Nixon back during his resignation. And as a result of that, many people have asked me what I think will be the impact on the stock market if Trump is forced to leave office early. Well, the best guide we have is to look at the S&P 500 during the Watergate years. And so the blue line I have up here is a chart of the performance of the S&P 500. You can see there was a major drop in the S&P 500 from the peak in 1972 until the trough in 1974. That was a loss of over 45%. So to try and get a better idea of what impact Watergate may have had on the stock market, let's put up some key markers that occurred during the White House Watergate scandal. In the late summer of 1972, the plumbers broke into the Watergate. They were caught and arrested trying to put bugging and surveilling equipment into the offices of the DNC. And almost immediately there were leaks to the Washington Post, which they published, which alluded to the fact that the burglary may have ties back to the White House. The Watergate burglary was a constant topic over the next few months. However, it did not impact the landslide re-election of Richard Nixon in November of 1972. But even after Nixon was re-elected and sworn into office, the allegations of involvement in the Watergate break-in and other events of collusion with that occurrence kept building, and much like today, that we're seeing with Donald Trump and the ongoing investigations and continuing arrests of people that are close to either the president or affiliated with the president's re-election committee, those same things happened throughout 1973. And as the evidence continued to build, the Senate eventually in the summer held televised hearings about the Watergate break-in and its involvement back to the White House and specifically to President Nixon. You have to remember, this is back in the days when there were only 3 networks, and televised hearings from the Senate chamber not only was informative, but it was compelling entertainment for the people of the day. It made big headlines, it captivated the nation. And from there, things got worse as we moved into the end of the year. In an unrelated event, Vice President Spiro Agnew had to resign because of corruption that took place before he was a vice president. And so things kept getting progressively worse for the Nixon White House. Nixon becomes so enraged with the special counsel that's investigating the Watergate break-in that he fires him. It was dubbed the Midnight Massacre. And as Nixon goes down in the polls, he appears on national TV and makes his famous "I am not a crook" speech.
And in all of my years of public life, I have never obstructed justice. And I think, too, that I can say that in my years of public life, that I welcome this kind of examination, because people have got to know whether or not their president is a crook. Well, I'm not a crook. I've earned everything I've got.
And so President Nixon, under severe pressure, not only getting hammered every day from the media, but falling in the public opinion polls, and then finally losing the support of the Republican Party, President Nixon resigns in August 1974. Shortly thereafter, the S&P bottoms out, and we have a full 46% decline from the peak of December 1972 until September 1974. So clearly, the Watergate scandal and the Nixon resignation devastated the stock market, and we can ask ourselves, will the same thing happen today if charges or other legal actions should be brought up against President Trump that would force him to be impeached or to resign or to somehow otherwise leave office early? But wait a minute, is it really that simple? Let's throw in one other factor: the Arab Oil Embargo. Gas prices not only shot up overnight, there were major shortages, and you were lucky if you could fill up your tank at all. So let's go back to that same chart of the S&P 500, and this time let's overlay it with the price of oil. Prior to the summer of 1973, the price of oil was pretty stable and was right around $3.56 a barrel. In the fall of 1973, there was the Yom Kippur War, and Saudi Arabia was furious over the backing of Israel by the United States. And so at that time, they began curtailing and limiting the amount of oil that would be exported to the United States. As I said, that caused the price of oil and obviously other petroleum products to not only instantaneously overnight shoot up in price, but also to create major shortages, and really the first time since World War II that the United States and the Western world had had major shortages of energy. And so again, directing your attention back to the chart of the S&P 500, notice how when the price of oil shoots up from about $3.56 a barrel to over $10 a barrel in a period of about 5 or 6 months, that also coincides not only with the trouble that Nixon is having with the Watergate investigations, but I think that major downturn in the S&P 500 had a whole lot more to do with the shock of an energy crisis than with the political shenanigans that were going on in Washington, D.C. And then once the price of oil stabilized and held at about $11 a barrel for about a year throughout 1975, that also corresponded to the recovery of the stock market and an overall adjustment to these higher energy and oil prices. In nominal terms, there was a significant recovery in the stock market, but when adjusting for inflation, there were no real rates of return. So as we get closer to the midterm elections, let's see if President Trump is haunted from the resignation of presidents past. But either way, I suspect there will be peace and prosperity and everything will work out just fine. Hey, until the next episode, as always, this is John Pugliano wishing you the very best returns.